Greenville, South Carolina, was beginning to gear up for the arrival of summer. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sun shone brightly, promising long, hot days ahead. On the quiet Elm Street, where modest and well-maintained homes lined up side by side, Maya Johnson was starting her day with her usual routine. Maya, a 35-year-old black woman, had lived in Greenville her whole life. She was known for her work at the local library and her dedication to the community. But on that day, something felt different. A strange and pungent odor had started to invade her home, growing stronger and more persistent. She was in the kitchen, making breakfast, when the smell made her stop. "What is that?" she murmured to herself, frowning. The odor was a mix of rot and mildew, something she had never smelled before. At first, she thought it might be something in her own house, but then she realized the smell was coming from the house next door, the residence of Mrs. Jenkins. Maya wasn't one to jump to conclusions. She decided to act based on what she knew. She grabbed her phone and called the local police. "Greenville Police Department, how can I help you?" The dispatcher's voice on the line sounded distant and uninterested. "Hi, my name is Maya Johnson. I live on Elm Street, next door to Mrs. Jenkins. I'm noticing a very strange and strong odor coming from her house. It smells like something rotten," Maya said, trying to stay calm. "Ms. Johnson, have you received any other complaints?" the dispatcher asked in a monotone voice. "No, but the smell is unbearable," Maya replied, feeling her frustration rise. "I think something might be wrong. Could you please come check it out? I understand your concern, but are you sure it's not something in your own house?" The dispatcher seemed more interested in ending the call than in helping. "No, I'm sure. I've checked everything here," Maya insisted. "Please send someone to check it out." "All right, I'll log the call. If there is an issue, we'll send someone," the dispatcher said before hanging up. Maya looked out the kitchen window and saw Mrs. Jenkins' house, an old and somewhat worn-down building. The yard was a bit neglected, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, the smell continued to torment her. Hours passed, and the police never showed up. Maya, worried and desperate, tried calling emergency services again, but the response was the same. Determined, she realized she needed to do something more. Later that sweltering afternoon, Maya stood on the sidewalk, watching Mrs. Jenkins' house. She decided to go over there in person. The house was quiet, showing no signs of movement. Maya walked up to the front door and knocked, but there was no response. "Mrs. Jenkins?" she called out. "Are you there?" No answer. The smell was even stronger now that she was so close. Maya looked around and noticed a partially open window. Gathering her courage, she carefully pushed open the window and climbed into the house. The interior was dark and dusty. Maya turned on the hallway light, and the odor instantly became nearly unbearable. She walked down the hallway into the kitchen and then towards a door that seemed to lead to the basement. The smell was stronger there. When she opened the door, she was met with a scene of devastation. Mrs. Jenkins' body lay on the floor in an advanced state of decay. Maya was momentarily frozen, overwhelmed by shock and sorrow. Mrs. Jenkins had always been a kind, elderly woman to her, and now Maya found herself facing a tragedy. She knew she had to act quickly. She ran back to the living room and grabbed the phone to call the police again. This time, her voice trembled with emotion and urgency. "Greenville Police Department, what's wrong?" The same monotone voice answered. "It's Maya Johnson again." She spoke rapidly. "I went into Mrs. Jenkins' house. She's dead. Please come immediately." "I understand, Ms. Johnson. We'll send a team right away." The voice on the line sounded more attentive. Maya hung up and waited, her heart racing. She knew the police response could have been much quicker if her concerns hadn't been dismissed earlier. But for now, the most important thing was that help was on the way. While waiting, Maya sat in Mrs. Jenkins' living room, her face etched with anguish and worry. She knew this tragedy could have been prevented if only her voice had been heard sooner. The fate of the Greenville community was now on the verge of changing, and Maya was at the center of this shift, fighting against a system that often ignored the voices that needed to be heard the most. After the alarming incident at Mrs. Jenkins' house, Maya Johnson's name began circulating throughout the Greenville community. People were shocked by the situation, and many reached out to offer their support and sympathy. However, Maya wasn't completely at ease. She knew the deeper issue wasn't just Mrs. Jenkins' case, but the way the system had ignored her call for help. The next morning, Maya was at the library, organizing books and trying to return to normalcy when her phone rang. It was the same emergency dispatcher she had spoken to the night before. "Hello, Ms. Johnson. This is Detective Carter." The officer's voice was now more attentive and professional. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened at Mrs. Jenkins' house." "Of course, Detective," Maya replied, trying to stay calm. "What do you need to know?" "First, could you describe again what led you to enter the house?" the detective asked. "Yes, of course," Maya began, her tone laden with frustration. "I was smelling a very strong odor coming from Mrs. Jenkins' house, something that smelled like it was decaying. When I tried calling the police the first time, I wasn't taken seriously. I kept trying, and when I finally entered the house, I found it in a deplorable state." "I understand. And why do you think your complaint was ignored earlier?" Detective Carter was clearly interested in understanding the context. "I'm not sure," Maya said, feeling a lump in her throat. "But I feel like maybe my being a black woman affected how my report was handled. I didn't get a proper response until I went to the house and found the body." "Thank you for clarifying." Detective Carter sighed. "We'll investigate this issue further. I appreciate your persistence and courage." Meanwhile, news about Mrs. Jenkins' death was spreading quickly through the town. At Maya's house, the atmosphere was filled with a mix of concern and determination. She sat with Jake, her best friend, and Emma, a new colleague who had become a valuable confidant. "I can't believe this happened," Jake said, running a hand through his hair. "How could the police ignore something so serious?" "That's what I don't understand either," Maya replied, her voice heavy with frustration. "I did everything I could to be heard. I don't know what more I could have done." "You did everything you could, Maya." Emma tried to comfort her friend. "Now it's important that your experience doesn't go to waste. The community needs to know what happened." "Yes, you're right," Maya agreed. "But I still feel like there's something more I need to do. I can't just let this fade away." Later that day, Maya met with the local pastor, Reverend Thompson, known for his social work and active voice in the community. Maya wanted to share her experience and seek support to ensure that the situation was discussed openly. "Reverend Thompson, thank you for meeting with me," Maya said as she entered the pastor's office. "Of course, Maya. It's always good to see you." The Reverend responded with a warm smile, though his expression quickly turned serious as he sensed Maya's gravity. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to discuss Mrs. Jenkins' situation and how the police handled my call for help," Maya began. "I feel like there's a major issue here that needs to be addressed." "Certainly, what happened is very serious," Reverend Thompson said, his tone grave. "Injustice cannot be ignored. I will help mobilize the community and ensure this case gets the attention it deserves." "Thank you, Reverend," Maya responded, relieved to have someone influential willing to help. "I just want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did and that our voices are truly heard." "You have my word, Maya. We'll work together to bring about change," Reverend Thompson said with determination. Through these conversations and the mobilization of the community, Maya felt she was beginning to make a difference, though she knew the path ahead would be long. The experience at Mrs. Jenkins' house and the treatment she received from the police were just the beginning of a movement she hoped to inspire. Maya was determined to fight for justice and for a system that truly listened to all voices, regardless of race, class, or social status. The fight was just beginning, and Maya was ready to face it, knowing that true change often requires courage and perseverance. The next morning brought a sense of uncertainty and anxiety for Maya Johnson. The news of Mrs. Jenkins' death had spread rapidly through town, and the fallout was growing. However, the personal impact on Maya was even deeper. Her mother's health was deteriorating, and the weight of family responsibilities was becoming increasingly heavy. Maya spent the morning helping her mother, Rita, with daily tasks and managing the medication she needed. Rita, a 62-year-old woman, had been diagnosed with a degenerative disease a few years ago, and her condition had worsened significantly. "Maya, did you forget my morning medication?" Rita asked weakly as she sat in her armchair. "No, Mom, I've got it right here," Maya responded, picking up the pill bottle from the table and handing it to her. I was just trying to handle a few things at the library and deal with the situation with Mrs. Jenkins. I know, dear, you're very busy, Rita said with a worried look. But you need to remember to take care of yourself, too. You can't carry the world on your shoulders alone. I know, Mom, Maya said, forcing a smile. It's just that I feel like I need to do something to make sure Mrs. Jenkins' situation isn't forgotten. And with the state Mrs. Jenkins was in, I can't just ignore it. At the local library, Maya was trying to focus on her work, but the pressure of managing her personal responsibilities and dealing with the police was starting to take its toll. Jake walked in, noticing the tired expression on his friend's face. "Hey Maya, how are you?" Jake asked with a concerned tone. "I heard things are tough with your mom." "That's true," Maya replied, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "And between taking care of her and trying to handle Mrs. Jenkins' case, I'm feeling overwhelmed." "You're doing your best, Maya." Jake tried to encourage her. "And you're not alone in this. We'll tackle it together. By the way, I spoke with some friends, and they're willing to help organize a community meeting to discuss what happened." "That would be great," Maya said, relieved. "We need to make sure the community gets involved and that Mrs. Jenkins' case doesn't fall by the wayside. And we also need to push the police to take real action." Jake added, "This situation has shown that there's a lot that needs to change." Later, Maya met with Emma at a local cafe. Emma, always a source of support, was concerned about the growing pressure on Maya and offered practical help. "Maya, I know you're going through a tough time, but you have to remember to take care of yourself, too," Emma said, as they both sat with coffee and croissants. "Let me help with organizing the community meeting. I can handle the publicity and logistics." "That would be a huge help, Emma," Maya responded with gratitude. "I really appreciate it. I just want people to know what happened and how important it is for the police to treat everyone with respect and seriousness." "We'll make it happen," Emma assured. "And about your mom, maybe you should consider professional help so you can have a bit more time for yourself." "Yes, I'm thinking about it," Maya admitted, her gaze distant. "It's just hard seeing my mom go through this and still having to manage everything else." That night, Maya was at home, trying to relax before another week full of commitments. She talked with her mother about the possibility of seeking professional help, and Rita, though reluctant, understood the need. "Maya, you've been a wonderful daughter," Rita said, with tears in her eyes. "But you can't completely sacrifice yourself for others. You need to take care of yourself, too." "I know, Mom," Maya replied, holding her mother's hand firmly. "I'm trying to find a balance." The situation with Mrs. Jenkins made me realize how much the community needs a voice and action, and that motivates me to fight even harder. Rita smiled, despite the visible pain. "Just don't forget that you need to be strong to take care of all of us, including yourself." The weight of expectations and responsibilities continued to press on Maya, but her determination to make a difference in the community and the need to find a balance in her personal life were powerful forces driving her forward. She knew that the changes she sought wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face the challenge, supported by friends and a community that also believed in the importance of fighting for justice. The next steps were crucial: mobilizing the community and pressing the authorities to handle Mrs. Jenkins' case with the seriousness it deserved. Maya was determined not to let her voice and her neighbors be ignored. The following week, Maya Johnson was preparing for the community meeting plan with the help of Emma and Jake. The meeting was scheduled for that evening at the local school and promised to be a crucial event to discuss what had happened with Mrs. Jenkins and the need for changes in the system. As Maya was at home, trying to organize her thoughts and prepare for the meeting, Jake called to go over the final details. "Hey Maya, how's it going?" Jake asked, his tone encouraging. "Hi Jake," Maya responded, trying to stay calm. "I'm a bit nervous but excited. What do we need to discuss last minute?" "Basically, we need to make sure everything is set for the meeting," Jake explained. "The community needs to be well-informed and engaged. I've also arranged for some witnesses to share their experiences." "That's great, Jake," Maya said, feeling a bit more confident. "And what about the press? Will they be there to cover the event?" "Yes, some reporters have confirmed," Jake confirmed. "I think we'll manage to get the attention the case deserves." Later, when Maya arrived at the school auditorium, the atmosphere was buzzing. There was a mix of concern and determination among the attendees. Most of the seats were filled, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Emma was there to help greet people and hand out informational flyers. When Maya walked in, Emma immediately approached her. "Maya, you look great," Emma exclaimed, hugging her friend. "The auditorium is packed, and people are really interested in hearing what you have to say." "It's a relief to hear that," Maya said, smiling. "I hope this helps push the authorities to take real action." "It will, I'm sure of it," Emma responded. "I've already seen a lot of people who are ready to get involved and support the cause." As the event started, Maya took the stage and looked out at the audience. She saw familiar and unfamiliar faces, all gathered to discuss an issue that had shaken the community. Maya took a deep breath and began her speech. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice resonating through the auditorium. "I'm here tonight to talk about what happened to Mrs. Jenkins and the lack of adequate response we faced when trying to alert the authorities." The audience was attentive, and the tension was palpable. Maya continued, sharing details about her attempts to contact the police and the neglect she encountered. "Mrs. Jenkins should not have died without someone caring about her well-being," Maya said, her voice firm. "And more importantly, no one should have their voice ignored, especially when they're trying to report an emergency." After Maya's speech, it was time for the witnesses to share their experiences. Among them was Mrs. Margaret, a neighbor who had noticed signs of trouble at Mrs. Jenkins' home but was also not taken seriously. "I saw Mrs. Jenkins a few times and noticed she wasn't doing well," Mrs. Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I tried to alert the police too, but no one seemed interested." "It's frustrating to hear that," Jake said, putting an arm around Maya in a gesture of support. "But we need to keep pushing for change." "Yes, we need to make sure our appeals are heard and that there is accountability," Maya agreed. After the meeting, as the attendees began to disperse, Maya met with Reverend Thompson in the hallway. He looked visibly pleased with the event. "Maya, you did an incredible job today," Reverend Thompson said, with an encouraging smile. "The community responded well, and the press is interested too. This is a big step in making sure Mrs. Jenkins' case gets the attention it deserves." "Thank you, Reverend," Maya replied, relieved. "I hope this helps make a difference and ensures that the police and the system respond appropriately in the future." "Definitely," Reverend Thompson confirmed. "Now we need to keep the pressure on and continue working to make this change happen." As Maya left the auditorium, she was approached by Jake and Emma, who were excited about the success of the meeting. "Maya, it was a success," Jake said with a broad smile. "The community really came together, and the press will make sure our message reaches even further," Emma added. "Now it's time to move forward and keep fighting for justice." Maya looked at her friends and felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. The fight was far from over, but the support from the community and the determination of her friends gave her the strength to keep going. The battle for justice was just beginning, but Maya knew that with the help of people like Jake and Emma, and with the community's engagement, she was closer to making a difference. After the success of the community meeting, Maya Johnson felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The community had rallied, and the pressure on the authorities was mounting. However, the weight of the situation was still very present, especially as Maya needed to balance the fight for justice with her personal responsibilities. The next morning, Maya decided to visit Lisa Jenkins, the granddaughter of Mrs. Jenkins. Lisa had been deeply shaken by her grandmother's death and had withdrawn from everything. Maya wanted to offer her support and see if there was any way she could help. Maya called Lisa before her visit to make sure she would be available. Lisa answered the phone with a tired tone. "Hello, Lisa?" Maya began, trying to sound as gentle as possible. "It's Maya Johnson. I wanted to check in on you and, if possible, visit to chat for a bit." "Oh, hi, Maya," Lisa replied with a sigh. "I'm a bit overwhelmed, but you can come by. The house is a bit messy, but don't worry about that." "I understand, Lisa," Maya said with empathy. "I just wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help. I'll be over soon." When Maya arrived at Lisa's house, the situation was evident. The house was disorganized, with boxes and items scattered everywhere. Lisa was sitting in a corner of the sofa, looking exhausted and downcast. "Hi, Lisa," Maya said, entering and taking off her shoes at the door. "How are you holding up?" "Hi, Maya," Lisa replied, trying to force a smile. I'm trying to manage everything, but it's really hard. My grandmother's death was such a shock. I didn't expect this. I can imagine. Maya said, sitting down next to Lisa. I just wanted to check in on you and see if there was anything I could do to help. I really don't know. Lisa admitted, her eyes welling up with tears. I have so much to handle and feel so lost. The house is a mess, and I don't have the energy to deal with it. Maybe I can help with that. Maya offered, gently. I can help tidy up a bit and see if we can find some support for you. That would be wonderful, Maya. Lisa said, her voice full of relief. I would really appreciate that. As Maya began helping to organize the house, the conversation between them grew more personal. Lisa shared more about her relationship with her grandmother and the difficulty of coping with the loss. Mrs. Jenkins was always a strong figure for me, Lisa said, looking at an old photo of her grandmother. She took care of me when I was a child and supported me in everything. Now I feel so alone without her. She sounds like she was an incredible person. Maya responded, with a compassionate look. Her loss is a great sadness for all of us, and I want to make sure your voice and your grandmother's are heard. I really hope that happens. Lisa said, with a hopeful tone. I saw the community meeting last night and heard how people are mobilizing. It gives me a bit of hope that things will get better. Definitely, Lisa, Maya assured her. We're working to make sure the community and authorities act correctly and that this type of situation doesn't happen again. Your grandmother deserves justice, and we're going to fight for it. As the hours passed, Maya and Lisa spent time organizing the house and talking. Maya's presence brought some comfort and practical help to Lisa, who had been feeling overwhelmed by the situation. By the end of the day, Lisa seemed a bit lighter and more relieved. Maya, I don't know how to thank you, Lisa said sincerely. You've been a great help and a real support for me during this tough time. No need to thank me, Lisa, Maya responded, with a warm smile. We're all in this together, and I'm here to help however I can. Before leaving, Maya gave Lisa a comforting hug and promised to stay in touch. With that, she said her goodbyes and headed back to her own home, carrying with her the feeling that she was making a difference, even through small actions. The fight for justice for Mrs. Jenkins continued, but Maya knew that every step toward change, no matter how small, was contributing to a larger impact. The solidarity and support of the community were crucial in facing the challenges and achieving the justice they sought. With the growing pressure from the community and the support of those around her, Maya Johnson felt optimistic about the changes on the horizon. However, the battle for justice was far from easy, and new difficulties were emerging. The next morning, Maya received an unexpected call from Detective Carter. Hello, Ms. Johnson. Detective Carter began, his voice formal. I wanted to inform you about an update on the Mrs. Jenkins case. Could we meet to discuss some details? Of course, Detective, Maya replied, trying to stay calm. Where should we meet? How about at the police station office at 2 p.m., suggested the detective. We can go over everything in detail there. At 2 p.m., Maya arrived at the police station with a mix of nervousness and determination. Detective Carter greeted her and led her to a meeting room where she sat, waiting anxiously. Thank you for coming, Ms. Johnson. Detective Carter began, entering the room and closing the door. I wanted to give you an update on the Mrs. Jenkins case. I'm listening, Maya said with anticipation. After a more in-depth investigation, we found some evidence that may help us better understand what happened. The detective explained. We're also reviewing our emergency call response protocols to ensure that similar cases are handled with more seriousness in the future. That's good to hear, but Maya hesitated before continuing. I'm still concerned about how my report was initially ignored. Is there an explanation for that? The situation is complex, Detective Carter admitted, with a serious look. The team was overwhelmed, and there were failures in the screening process. We're working to fix that, but it's important to understand that mistakes were made. Mistakes that could have been avoided if the situation had been treated with the proper attention. Maya responded, her frustration evident. What about the next step? What will be done to ensure this doesn't happen again? We're planning a complete review of our procedures and additional training for officers. Carter said, try to sound reassuring. We'll make sure cases get the attention they deserve. I hope that happens, Maya said, her voice carrying a hint of skepticism but with a glimmer of hope. And what about justice for Mrs. Jenkins? We're moving forward with the investigation and gathering all available information to build a strong case. Detective Carter assured her, "We'll keep you updated on any developments." After the meeting at the station, Maya was determined to keep the pressure on the authorities and ensure that the promised changes were implemented. She met with Emma and Jake to discuss the latest updates and the next steps. "So, how was the meeting with the detective?" Jake asked, looking at Maya with expectation. The detective gave us an update on the investigation. Maya began, taking a sip of coffee. "They're reviewing procedures and promising better training, but I still feel we need to ensure the changes are actually implemented." "I agree," Emma added. "We can't let this fall by the wayside. We need to keep pushing and monitoring the progress." "Exactly," Maya agreed. "And we also need to keep the community informed about the progress and what we're doing to secure justice for Mrs. Jenkins. Let's plan a new community meeting to update everyone on the progress and make sure the pressure continues," Jake suggested. "This could also help rally more support and resources." "Good idea," Maya responded with a smile. "Let's do it. We need to make sure the community's voice keeps being heard." As Maya and her friends planned the next community meeting, other issues began to arise. Media attention on Mrs. Jenkins' case was increasing, and some groups began opposing the movement, claiming it was being used to create divisions. Maya received an anonymous letter at her home that criticized her actions and accused her of trying to destabilize the community. The letter left her deeply unsettled and worried. "Jake, I got a letter today," Maya said, her voice trembling as she called him. "It's anonymous, but it has severe criticism of what we're doing. Don't worry about it right now," Jake responded, trying to calm her. "It's normal to face opposition when you're pushing for change. The important thing is that we stay focused on justice and not let this discourage us." "I know, but it's hard to deal with," Maya admitted. "I'll need to figure out how to handle the opposition and keep moving forward." "And you're not alone in this," Jake said firmly. "We're all here to support you, and together, we'll keep fighting for justice." Maya felt bolstered by her friend's support, but she knew the road ahead would be full of challenges. The fight for justice for Mrs. Jenkins was far from over, and confronting opposition while ensuring the promised changes were implemented was crucial. With renewed determination and the support of her community, Maya was ready to face the next chapter of her journey, knowing that every step toward justice and equality was a victory for everyone. As the fight for justice for Mrs. Jenkins continued, Maya Johnson faced a new challenge: the growing media pressure and resistance from some community members. Opposition was becoming more vocal, and it was starting to affect how Maya felt about the movement. That morning, Maya met with Emma and Jake at a local cafe to discuss the upcoming community meeting and the increasing resistance. They were seated at a corner table, with coffee cups and papers scattered around. "The media is starting to spread misinformation," Jake commented, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Some articles are twisting the facts and creating unnecessary divisions." "I've seen that too," Emma agreed, looking at the newspapers spread out on the table. "It seems like they're trying to turn this into a community divide issue rather than focusing on the real problem: the inadequate response from the authorities." "It's frustrating," Maya said, resting her head in her hands. "It feels like all our efforts are being undermined by a distorted narrative. It's like we're fighting against a sea of misinformation. We can't let that discourage us," Jake said firmly. "We need to stay focused and keep communicating the truth. The community meeting can be an opportunity to clarify the facts and reaffirm our commitment to justice." "Yes, and we also need to use the media to our advantage," Emma suggested. "We can organize a press conference and invite journalists who are willing to report the facts fairly and accurately." The press conference was scheduled for the end of that week, and Maya prepared to speak with the reporters. She knew it would be an important opportunity to defend the movement and correct the media distortions. The conference room was filled with journalists and cameras, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Maya stepped up to the podium and began to speak, her voice firm and clear. "Thank you all for coming." Maya started, looking at the audience. "We're here today to clarify the facts about Mrs. Jenkins' case and the response from the community and authorities." She went on to explain the events from the beginning, addressing the criticisms and distortions that had been spread. She also talked about the impact of the inadequate response and the importance of ensuring it doesn't happen again. Our fight is not just about Mrs. Jenkins, Maya said with determination. It's about making sure all voices are heard and that the system works for everyone without discrimination. The reporters asked questions, and Maya answered with patience and clarity, trying to steer the narrative away from negativity and focus on the truth. The press conference was extensively covered and seemed to have a positive impact on how the media was reporting the case. As Maya struggled to balance her responsibilities and take care of her own health, she was constantly reminded of why she was fighting. Her determination to make a difference and ensure justice for Mrs. Jenkins was a constant motivation. The next step would be crucial: maintaining focus on justice and ensuring that all promises made were fulfilled. The journey was far from over, but Maya knew that with the support of her friends, her community, and the determination to fight for the truth, she was on the right path. As the environment around Maya Johnson grew more tense, she knew she needed a direct approach to handle the situation. The community meeting was scheduled for the following week, but before that, Maya decided to hold a meeting with the city police to discuss the promised changes and ensure they were being implemented. On a Thursday afternoon, Maya arrived at the police station for her meeting with Captain Mark Thompson and some members of the investigative team. She was nervous but determined to get answers and ensure that Mrs. Jenkins' case received the attention it deserved. Captain Mark Thompson, a tall man with a serious expression, greeted her at the entrance of the office. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for coming," Captain Thompson said, extending his hand. "We'll discuss your concerns regarding Mrs. Jenkins' case and the promised changes." "Thank you for meeting with me, Captain," Maya replied, shaking his hand. "I'd like to understand better how the case is being handled now and what changes are being implemented to prevent similar situations in the future." "Certainly, let's sit down and talk," Thompson said, leading Maya to a conference room. In the conference room, Captain Thompson, Maya, and two police officers sat around a table. Maya began to express her concerns clearly and directly. "I'd like to start by thanking you for the update that was provided earlier," Maya began, looking at each of the attendees. "However, I still have some questions about how the changes are being implemented and how you're ensuring that all protocols are being followed correctly. We're conducting a thorough review of emergency call procedures," Captain Thompson explained. "Additionally, we're providing extra training for the team to improve screening and response to critical situations." "That's a good start," Maya said, nodding. "But what can be done to ensure there's no further negligence? How can we make sure that Mrs. Jenkins' case is treated with the seriousness it deserves?" "We're committed to ensuring that cases like Mrs. Jenkins don't happen again," Thompson assured. "We're closely monitoring all calls and conducting regular audits to ensure compliance with the new procedures." "And what about transparency?" Maya asked, her tone firm. "The community needs to know that changes are actually being implemented and that the system is working as it should." "We're working to improve communication with the community," Captain Thompson responded. "There will be regular reports on the progress of the changes and on the response to emergency calls." "That's encouraging," Maya said, relieved but still concerned. "I'd like to receive those reports and keep an open line of communication to ensure that everything is being done properly." "Absolutely," Thompson agreed. "We'll make sure you and the community receive the necessary information and that there's ongoing follow-up." After the meeting, Maya met with Jake and Emma to discuss what had been addressed with the police. They were sitting in a small cafe near the station, reviewing notes and discussing the next steps. "How did the meeting with the captain go?" Jake asked, eager for an update. "It was productive, but there's still a lot to be done," Maya replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "They're implementing changes and providing additional training, which is a good sign. However, we still need to ensure these changes are applied consistently." "And what about transparency?" Emma asked, curious. "Did they promise to provide regular reports?" "Yes, they will provide reports on the progress of the changes and the response to emergency calls," Maya confirmed. "We'll need to keep a close eye on this and ensure the community receives the necessary information. So, the next step is to keep pressing and ensure that everything is working as promised," Jake said with a determined look. "We also need to continue mobilizing community support to keep the pressure on the authorities." "Exactly," Maya agreed, smiling. and we need to ensure that the community meeting is a success to keep everyone informed and engaged. As Maya and her friends prepared for the community meeting, the tension was high, but the determination to achieve justice and ensure the system worked properly remained strong. The fight was far from over, but with everyone's collaboration and focus on maintaining pressure, Maya was confident that they could make a difference. The next challenge would be to ensure that all promises were kept and that the community stayed united around the cause. With every step taken, Maya was a little closer to achieving the justice that Mrs. Jenkins and her family deserved. The week following the meeting with the police was packed with activity for Maya Johnson and her team. The community meeting was fast approaching, and the effort to ensure the community's voice was heard had never been more intense. Maya, Emma, and Jake were coordinating logistics and working hard to make sure the event would have the desired impact. On the morning of the community meeting, the energy was high. The chosen venue, a community school, was decorated and set up to accommodate a large number of participants. Maya, Emma, and Jake were in a corner, going over the final details. "Is everything ready for the meeting?" Maya asked, her eyes scanning the venue. "Yes, the decorations look perfect and the informational materials are ready." Emma replied with a smile. "We're just hoping for a good turnout and active participation." "Have the media representatives confirmed?" Jake asked, checking his phone. "Yes, they'll be here to cover the event." Emma confirmed. "We have some journalists who have shown interest and promised to report on the event fairly." "Great," Maya said, letting out a sigh of relief. "Let's make sure the meeting is a success and that the message reaches both the community and the authorities clearly." As people began to arrive, the venue quickly filled up. Maya took the stage to open the meeting, while Jake and Emma helped coordinate the flow of participants and handed out informational materials. "Good evening, everyone." Maya began, taking the microphone. "Thank you for being here today. This meeting is an opportunity for us to discuss the progress on Mrs. Jenkins' case and the changes we're seeking to ensure that similar situations are handled with the seriousness they deserve." The audience applauded, and Maya continued to talk about the progress that had been made and what still needed to be done. She also emphasized the importance of keeping pressure on the authorities and staying engaged in the cause. "We appreciate everyone who has joined us in this fight," Maya said, with a tone of gratitude. "Your presence here shows a commitment to justice and to a fairer community for all." After her speech, Maya handed the floor to some community representatives who had been prominent in the fight for justice. Among them was Lisa Jenkins, Mrs. Jenkins' granddaughter, who stood up to share her perspective. "I'd like to thank everyone for their support during this difficult time." Lisa began, her voice choked with emotion. "The fight for my grandmother's justice is more than just a case for me. It's about dignity and respect for my family and for all of us." The audience listened attentively as Lisa shared her experiences and the importance of maintaining pressure to ensure justice was served. After the speeches, the meeting was open to questions and discussions. Participants raised concerns and asked questions, and Maya, Jake, and Emma responded with clarity and honesty. "How can we ensure that the promises made by the police are actually kept?" an elderly woman asked, her expression worried. "We're closely monitoring progress, and we'll have access to regular reports on the implementation of the changes." Maya replied, trying to provide reassurance. "We will also keep the community informed and continue to press for all promises to be fulfilled." "And what about media support?" a young activist asked. "How can we ensure that the media continues to cover the case fairly and accurately?" "We're working to maintain an open relationship with the media and ensure coverage is fair." Jake responded confidently. "We also encourage the community to stay engaged and keep the pressure on everyone involved." As the meeting drew to a close, the overall sentiment was one of renewed determination. Participants were better informed and more engaged, and there was a sense that the community was united around the cause. "Maya, you did a great job today," Emma said as they helped clean up the venue. "The meeting was successful, and the community is clearly motivated to keep fighting for justice." "Yes, it was a big step," Maya agreed with a tired smile. "But there's still much to do. We need to ensure that everyone stays engaged and that progress is maintained. And we'll be here to support that," Jake said firmly. "Together, we'll keep working to ensure justice is served and necessary changes are implemented." With the community meeting concluded and the community more mobilized than ever, Maya felt a bit more confident about the future. The fight for Mrs. Jenkins' justice was still ongoing, but with community support and everyone's continued commitment, she knew they were moving in the right direction. The next challenge would be to closely monitor the implementation of the promised changes and ensure that justice was achieved for Mrs. Jenkins and her family. The renewed energy from the community meeting was palpable, but the reality of Maya Johnson's fight was far from straightforward. The pressure to ensure that the promised changes were implemented was mounting, and tensions were running high. Weekly meetings with the police representatives had become a regular topic of discussion, and Maya was about to face a new challenge when an unexpected obstacle emerged. On Monday morning, Maya received an urgent call from Captain Mark Thompson. He wanted to meet with her immediately to discuss something important. Worried, Maya scheduled a meeting at the police station for that afternoon. When she arrived at the station, Maya was escorted to Captain Thompson's office. He was sitting behind his desk with a serious expression. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming." Thompson began, standing to greet her. "I have some important information to share with you." "What's going on, Captain?" Maya asked, her face lined with concern. "We receive an anonymous tip alleging that there have been some irregularities in the response to Mrs. Jenkins' case." Thompson said gravely, "It appears there are accusations that some of the promised procedures have not been properly followed." "That's concerning," Maya replied, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. "What exactly has been reported?" "The tip claims that some recent emergency calls were mishandled and that the additional training isn't being implemented properly." Thompson explained, "We're investigating these allegations, but I wanted you to be aware of what's happening." "And what can we do to address this?" Maya asked, her voice resolute. "We're working to review the procedures and ensure any failures are corrected," Thompson said. "But I'd like to ask for your help in making sure the community knows we're taking these issues seriously and are committed to resolving any problems." "Of course, I'm willing to help communicate this to the community," Maya replied firmly. "But we need to act quickly to fix any issues and ensure the promises are kept." That same afternoon, Maya met with Jake and Emma to discuss the situation. They were in a local cafe, trying to deal with a new twist in the case. "So, what's the update?" Jake asked, looking worried. "Captain Thompson informed me about an anonymous tip." Maya began, her tone troubled. "It alleges that some of the promised changes aren't being properly implemented and that there have been irregularities in handling emergency calls." "This is a big issue," Emma said, her voice tense. "We need to make sure this is addressed immediately and that the community knows we're working to correct the situation." "Yes, and we also need to push to make sure any issues are resolved effectively." Maya agreed. "I'll work with Captain Thompson to ensure that necessary measures are taken and that transparency is maintained." That night, while Maya was at home reviewing documents and reports, she received a call from an anonymous source. The person wanted to provide additional information about the irregularities. "Hello?" Maya answered, her voice filled with anticipation. "Maya Johnson?" The voice on the line asked, low and cautious. "I have information about Mrs. Jenkins' case. There's more you need to know. What do you have to tell me?" Maya asked, listening intently. "Some of the allegations are true." The voice replied urgently. "There have been significant failures in implementing the promised changes, and there are records showing that emergency calls were not handled properly." "How can I verify this?" Maya asked, her mind racing. "I'll send you some documents to your email," the voice said. "They contain details you need to know. But be careful, there are people involved who don't want this to come out." "Thank you for the information," Maya said, with a tone of gratitude. "I'll review the documents and take the necessary steps." With the new information in hand, Maya decided to call an emergency meeting with Captain Thompson and his team to discuss the findings and the steps to be taken. "Captain Thompson, I have some evidence showing that the promises made about the changes have not been fully met." Maya began with a serious look. "I've received your information, Ms. Johnson," Thompson responded, examining the documents. "We need to treat this with the utmost seriousness and act quickly to correct any failures." "I agree," Maya said firmly. "We need to ensure that the changes are implemented effectively and that the community knows we're working to resolve these issues." With the meeting scheduled and the next steps outlined, Maya felt both relieved and worried. She knew that the fight for justice for Mrs. Jenkins was far from over, and that transparency and accountability were crucial to ensure the promised changes were fulfilled. The next challenge would be to address the discovered failures and ensure that the promises were effectively carried out, with the community and media closely monitoring the progress. After the emergency meeting, the tension in the community was palpable. Maya Johnson and her team were focused on ensuring that the identified failures were corrected and that the community's trust in the police force was restored. The pressure was high, and the need for immediate action was clear. The next morning, Maya was preparing for a live interview with a local news channel. The goal was to share the recent findings with the community and press the authorities to take corrective measures. Jake and Emma were with her, reviewing the main points that would be discussed. "Okay, Maya, remember to stay clear and focused," Jake said, going over his notes. "We need to make sure the message is communicated clearly to the community and to those in charge." "Yes, I understand," Maya replied, adjusting her blazer. "I want to ensure that the community knows we are committed to addressing these issues and that transparency is crucial. And don't forget to mention that we're working with the authorities to ensure all the failures are corrected," Emma added. "This will help show that we're working together to resolve the problem." "Absolutely," Maya confirmed. "I'll make sure to cover that." Later, at the news studio, Maya sat in front of the cameras, the lights shining on her face. The anchor, David Harris, began the interview with a serious look. "Good afternoon, Maya Johnson," David said in a professional tone. "Thank you for joining us today to discuss the recent findings regarding Mrs. Jenkins' case." "Good afternoon, David," Maya replied, adjusting her seat. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this. Let's get straight to it," David began. "What new information do you have to share with our audience about the failures in emergency response and the implementation of the promised changes?" "We've received documents showing that there were significant failures in implementing the promised changes," Maya explained with a serious expression. "Additionally, we discovered that some emergency calls were not handled properly, which is unacceptable. How are you handling this situation, and what is being done to correct these failures?" David asked. "We're working in collaboration with Captain Thompson and his team to ensure that all corrective measures are taken," Maya responded. "We're also closely monitoring the progress and making sure the community is kept informed about the actions being taken." "And what has been the response from the community and the authorities so far?" David inquired. "The community's response has been positive, with many supporting our efforts for transparency and accountability," Maya said. "The authorities, in turn, are committed to addressing the failures and implementing the necessary changes." After the interview, Maya, Jake, and Emma met to discuss the coverage's impact and the next steps. The interview went well, Jake said, smiling. "The message was clear, and the coverage seems to have been fair." "Yes, and the community's response has been encouraging as well," Emma agreed. "Many people are showing support and offering to help with our cause." "That's great," Maya replied, relieved. "We need to leverage this support to keep pushing for changes and ensure that justice for Mrs. Jenkins is achieved." The next day, Maya received an unexpected visit from Rita, her mother, who was concerned about Maya's stress and workload. "Maya, I wanted to see you and check how you're doing," Rita said, hugging her daughter. "I've heard you've been working so hard, and I wanted to make sure you're taking care of yourself." "I'm doing my best, Mom," Maya replied with a tired smile. "It's just a tough time, but I'm trying to keep everything under control." "I understand, but don't forget that your health is important too," Rita advised with a worried tone. "You need to find a balance and not overwork yourself." "I'll try," Maya said with a grateful look. "Thank you for caring. Your words mean a lot to me." As Maya and her mother talked, Lisa Jenkins reached out to request a meeting with Maya. Lisa was eager to discuss the next steps in the fight for justice for her grandmother. "Maya, thank you for taking the time to meet with me," Lisa said as she met Maya at a local cafe. "I wanted to talk about what we can do next to ensure that my grandmother's case remains a priority." "Of course, Lisa," Maya replied with an encouraging look. "I'm here to help. What do you have in mind?" "I believe we need to ramp up our mobilization and perhaps organize a peaceful protest to keep the pressure on the authorities," Lisa suggested. "It would also be helpful if we could get more support from community leaders and local organizations." "That's an excellent idea," Maya agreed. We can start planning this and ensure we have the necessary support to make a significant impact. With growing community support and the determination to continue pushing for justice, Maya felt more confident about the next steps. The path to ensuring the promises were fulfilled was still challenging, but with ongoing solidarity and commitment, she was determined to achieve justice for Mrs. Jenkins and ensure the identified failures were corrected. The next step would be to mobilize the community and maintain high pressure, keeping the focus on truth and justice. Preparations for the peaceful protest were in full swing. Maya Johnson, Lisa Jenkins, Jake, and Emma worked tirelessly to ensure the event's success. Signs were made, volunteers were recruited, and a series of inspiring speeches were planned. The goal was clear: keep the pressure on the authorities and ensure justice for Mrs. Jenkins. On the day of the protest, the sun shone brightly, and a crowd of supporters gathered in the city center. The atmosphere was one of determination and hope, with people holding signs and banners demanding justice and transparency. Maya, Lisa, Jake, and Emma were on the makeshift stage, ready to start the event. "I'm so nervous, but also excited," Lisa said to Maya, looking out at the gathered crowd. "This means so much to me and to my grandmother's memory." "You're doing an amazing job, Lisa," Maya replied, offering an encouraging look. "Your voice and everyone here today will make a difference. Let's show that we're united and that we demand justice." "Look, Captain Thompson has arrived." Emma pointed to the side of the stage, where the captain was approaching with some officers. "That's good," Maya said, with a tone of expectation. "I hope he sees the seriousness and support of the community." As the crowd began to stir, Maya took the stage and grabbed the microphone. The sound of voices and applause filled the air as she began her speech. "Good afternoon, everyone," Maya started with a strong, clear voice. "Thank you for being here today to support our cause. We are here to demand justice for Mrs. Jenkins and ensure that the identified failures are corrected." The crowd cheered and shouted words of support. Maya continued to talk about the importance of transparency and accountability, emphasizing that the fight was not just about a specific case, but about justice and fairness for everyone in the community. "What we're doing here today is important not only for Mrs. Jenkins' memory, but to ensure that everyone can be confident that justice will be served," Maya said passionately. "We need to keep the pressure on and make sure the authorities fulfill their promises." After Maya's speech, Lisa took the stage to share her personal perspective. "Thank you all for being here," Lisa began, her voice filled with emotion. "For me, this is about honoring my grandmother's memory and ensuring that the truth is known. We are here to demand that the authorities do what is right and that justice is achieved." The crowd listened attentively, and the support was palpable. Participants joined in a collective cry for justice, showing their firm commitment to the cause. As the protest continued, Maya and her colleagues met with Captain Thompson, who had been observing the event intently. After the protest ended, Maya approached him to discuss the event's impact and the next steps. "Captain Thompson, I want to thank you for attending our protest," Maya said, extending her hand. "I hope you've seen the community's support and the seriousness of our cause." "Yes, I've seen and heard," Thompson replied, shaking Maya's hand. "The protest had a significant impact, and I understand the importance of addressing the issues raised. We are committed to correcting the failures and ensuring that the promised changes are effectively implemented." "That's encouraging to hear," Maya said, relieved. "The community expects to see concrete actions and real changes. We can start working on a detailed plan to address the failures and improve our procedures," Thompson promised. "Additionally, we will keep the community informed about our progress." "I appreciate your commitment," Maya said, with a tone of gratitude. "Let's continue to work together to ensure that justice is achieved." In the following days, Maya continued to closely monitor the progress of the changes and communication with the community. Support remained strong, and the pressure on the authorities helped ensure that the promises were kept. Justice for Mrs. Jenkins was drawing nearer, and the community was more united than ever. Maya felt a deep sense of accomplishment as she saw the fruits of hard work and collective determination. The fight for justice was not entirely over, but changes were underway, and the community's voice had made a difference. The path to justice was becoming clearer, and Maya knew that, with ongoing unity and support, they could achieve a fairer and more equitable future for all.